Whenever you're ready, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Donnelly, and I teach third grade at the Talented and Gifted School in East Harlem. Today we watched a lesson on fractions. I focused specifically on Standard 3 NF1, which is understanding that fractional parts are equal size parts of a whole unit. Okay, so that was our area of focus, specifically centered around the whole concept of the importance of identifying and specifying the whole when we work with fractions, which will take us into future lessons when we compare and order fractions and explore equivalence.
Okay, so again, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Donnelly. I teach third grade at the Talented and Gifted School in East Harlem, and the lesson that I taught today was a third grade math lesson.
Perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to go through the questions with you. So first question is, make sure I'm still on math here. How does this lesson connect to and build on students' prior skills and knowledge? What was taught before the lesson and what will come after it?
This lesson, we are sort of revisiting our fraction lessons from previous days, and we have explored fractions as part of the whole, but I noticed equal size part of the whole. What I noticed that my students were still having difficulty comparing fractions to different sized wholes. So we also will continue lessons on comparing fractions and equivalence, since fractions, it's a big part of one of the math domains for third grade. And then I know in fourth grade, in terms of coherence, it's also a big focus in fourth grade as well. So we're sort of revisiting it, hopefully with a different lens and hopefully building on what we know. And so my students will be ready for fourth grade.
Good. Okay, so moving on. Talk about the standards or cluster targeted in the lesson. What did you do to make the lesson reflect the full intent of that standard or cluster?
I specifically focused, my focus was Standard 3 NF1, which relies heavily on emphasizing fractions as part of a whole unit. And I really wanted to emphasize that the size of the whole does affect the fractional part, because I feel like a lot of misconceptions with my students is that they believe that 1/2 is always the same size. So I wanted to sort of go back and readdress that question by using pattern blocks. We've explored fractions with other manipulatives in the past, but today our focus was exploring using pattern blocks.
Which of the core action indicators do you think this lesson best exemplified, and how did you plan for this?
Hopefully it exemplified core action 3, which is rigor, which is sort of a combination of the other core actions, focus, coherence, and fluency, application, and conceptual understanding. What my purpose was to give my students different sized wholes within the same activity, so they can, or they could hopefully understand that the size of the whole does affect the fractional part. And by doing so, hopefully they didn't just identify a fractional part as one particular representation. For example, on the first page, a half represented a hexagon, and let's say when the whole changed on the second page, a half represented, let's just say, a triangle. So just giving them more experiences and exposure to different sized wholes. So hopefully that will build a strong foundation of fractions and will lead to conceptual understanding.
Discuss how this lesson illustrates the shifts required by the CCSS.
As I previously stated, hopefully it embodies, it's a combination of all three shifts. The first one being focus, is I really looked at the standard itself and asked myself several questions. What was the best way that I could make this standard accessible to my students in an engaging way, a way that they would enjoy exploring different sized wholes. And that's why I chose to start off the activity with an investigation where the problem at hand, the teacher didn't specify the whole, and 3 different students had 3 different perspectives because the whole was never established. So without telling them that, I had them explore how and why 3 different students had 3 different perspectives when looking at one particular image. And then I also looked at core action 2 insofar as coherence, what they learned in 2nd grade. And since we're finished with, we're sort of near the end of the year, I was also looking at 4th grade to see what they need to know in terms of 4th grade. And then insofar as conceptual understanding, hopefully just having experience with the activity helped build that.
Good. How did you teach this lesson prior to the CCSS? What is the same and what is different?
What's definitely different is sort of slowing down the content. Prior to this, we sort of had a lot of skills to teach within the school year. Now I feel like there may be a little bit less, but we're going deeper and having more time to really explore each standard, which will lead to conceptual understanding. For example, 2 years ago, I've always taught 3rd grade. This is my 7th year teaching. 2 years ago, I sort of taught fractions really quickly. I talked about mixed numbers and a lot of things that I would have to move fast insofar as pacing is concerned. And my students didn't really have, I think, as much understanding as hopefully they do now, because I had so many skills to teach all at once. So now what's interesting is I'm talking more about the whole, and I'm talking more about the unit fraction being the basic building block, if you will, for fractions. So for example, 2/3 is a combination of 2 1/3, which is really important and sort of the basis of fractions. And so far as conceptual understanding, prior to this, I didn't do that. There wasn't so much emphasis on the unit fraction. So, and now I feel like it's really important to give them many different opportunities to explore fractions, whether they're working with manipulatives, they're working by putting a fraction on a number line and exploring equivalence. Number lines are definitely new insofar as the content for me to teach, which I feel like actually doing that, it does help insofar as having conceptual understanding, because I definitely have given my students more opportunities to explore the concept of fractions than I have in the past.
How did the students handle this lesson? Did they understand the mathematics of the lesson?
I would like to say overall, yes. I definitely had some individual conferences with some students who are still struggling with the basic fact of the size of the whole does affect the fractional part. So what I did was, with one student, a student was having difficulty with one of the problems. So I gave that student 2 different size papers, and I asked the student to fold it into halves. And then I said, is 1/2 always the same size? So I switched what that student was working with, the pattern block, to now actually folding a piece of paper. And after giving him different examples, he was able to understand that the half did change, but I definitely still need to work with him further to sort of elaborate the why behind it. So we definitely made some progress, but I, noted on my clipboard that I do need to work with him further, with that student further. And insofar as overall, my sort of read of the lesson, I would think that it went well for the other students. They were able to kind of understand sort of the big idea of the size of the whole affecting the size of the fractional part, which was why we ended with the discussion with the exit ticket at the end, just so I could kind of have a sense. And then I'll read over the answers to get a full read of how it went. But overall, I thought it went pretty well.
Explain how you differentiated in the lesson. Did all students get opportunities to work on grade level content?
I sort of differentiated before I taught the lesson. I had challenges for every activity. So for my students, if they finished early, if they were able to handle the content, I gave them an activity to do to enrich their learning. And I also, in addition to the challenge, I had what I call an extra challenge for them to work on if they finished the challenge. And then insofar as I also differentiated within the moment, as I mentioned with the previous student, was struggling using the pattern block. So I switched the whole to a size, to a paper. So I planned ahead. I had things to do for those who finished early, and then within the moment, I also thought about students who are struggling, and I had a backup insofar as different models for students to manipulate.
Which behaviors from Core Action 3 did the students best exemplify in this lesson?
I would say conceptual understanding, specifically with their responses to how the size of the whole affects the fractional part. And one thing that I also did notice with the beginning, with the pre-activity, if you will, few of my students that I spoke with recognized that the whole wasn't specified, which was why so many students, the 3 students, had a different perspective of what picture the fraction represents, which was how the Mrs. Francis worded the problem, which I thought was really interesting. They, hopefully with my questions, they were able to kind of elaborate more, but so I thought that exemplified conceptual understanding.
Reflecting on the lesson, what worked well and what might you do differently?
What I think worked well was the pre-activity. I really liked starting with an investigation for them to explore, to kind of conclude that not establishing the whole was problematic and it left the answers ambiguous. At the same time, as much as I enjoyed including that as part of the lesson, it made my overall lesson a little longer. So I would say maybe pacing, something that I would maybe do differently, maybe cut down on some of the activities that they had and just break it into separate lessons as opposed to one long lesson.
Last question. Were there any surprises or unexpected student behaviors or reactions?
Unexpected. I would say I was pretty impressed with some of my students' responses insofar as I mentioned previously, how the whole wasn't specified, which left the interpretation ambiguous. I thought I was impressed with that, and something that I wouldn't necessarily say surprised me, but I did come across a partnership where one student didn't understand a question, and then her partner, as opposed to myself, helped her through it. Previously, I would, lead her through it and help her, but I sort of stepped back and let her peer, her partnership, her peer, think, pair, share partner, help her. And he did. And then after, we went through it together, she was able to explain it really well. So I saw the actual learning happen. I mean, not that I don't see that every day, but it's nice to see it happening between students, student to student, as opposed to teacher to student all the time.
You did a great job.
Really? I was so